And welcome back, everybody. We're chatting with our good friend Keith Nestor, talking about introducing evangelicals to the Mass. And very important last point. You know, there's what we're doing in the Mass is very different from a typical evangelical worship service. In that, like you said, it's worship service is trying to bring people emotionally to a point where they're open to hear the gospel being preached. Where at the Mass, like you said, really we're coming to the foot of the cross. And those are two very different, although related contexts.
Yeah, and I think that's the key to help people understand, so that you're not trying to compare apples to oranges, because when you're trying to compare apples to oranges, it's like, oh, well, this doesn't look like that. Well, it's not supposed to. And that can help you to explain to people what is so different and why it's different. And I think what's important equally is to talk about how, look, this is the way that Christians worshiped, all of them, for, 15, 1600 years and then beyond. This new phenomenon that we have of these sort of free-flowing worship services where just kind of anything happens, that's a relatively new thing in the life of the church, or in Christianity, however you want to refer to that. And a lot of people, we don't have that mindset. I know that I didn't. I thought, well, this is obviously the way that the apostles worship. They had a band and they had a sermon. I mean, St. Paul talked for hours and hours, and then that guy fell out of the window, if you remember from the book of Acts, right? But, keep in mind, that wasn't a worship service either. That was just St. Paul talking. That wasn't what they were doing on Sundays, was it? So we have to recognize that when we're trying to help somebody come into the Mass that's never been or doesn't understand, and their only framework has been a Protestant evangelical worship service, we've got to start with what are we trying to do here? What is the purpose of the Mass? And the most important thing that you have to mention to them is the idea of the sacrifice, the idea of that. And for me, it's been helpful to connect that with what the Jews did in the temple, and to talk about how what we do in the Mass is basically the fulfillment of that Lamb of God sacrifice that takes away the sin of the world. And that's a representation of what Christ did on Calvary. And a lot of times people have never even heard that before. You'd be amazed how many Protestants don't have the first clue what a Catholic Mass is like. They've never been. They don't understand. So we've got to help explain that to them. But what I think is really cool is there are some things, that will be challenges for evangelicals when they come into the Mass. But I think there also will be some things that they can relate to and that will connect with them. So I don't know, maybe we should talk about some of the challenges, Gary. I don't know. Do you have any things that in your mind you look at and you go, okay, if you're an evangelical coming to Mass, what might be some challenges?
Yeah, well, you already did one big challenge, because the idea of sacrifice as form of worship is not really found in evangelicalism, right? So that's a kind of foreign concept.
Yeah.
And so, that's a great hack. I guess you would go to remind them of, the sacrifice of the temple and how Christ fulfills that. Would that be typically how you'd explain?